It's my pleasure to introduce Jim Stovall of Tulsa, Oklahoma, who is the founder and president of the Emmy Award-winning Narrative Television Network, making television accessible to our nation's 13 million blind and visually impaired people. Jim is also a world-renowned speaker, author of 51 books, including the best-selling book, The Ultimate Gift, which was also made into a major motion picture by 20th Century Fox. In your youth, you were also a National Olympic weightlifting champion. And for those unfamiliar with his story, he started losing his sight at 17 and went completely blind by age 30. Jim was also featured as episode number 163 in the Special Fathers Network Dad podcast, and backed by popular demand, our guest today. Jim Stovall, the Zoom stage is yours.
Well, thank you, my friend David. It's great to be back with you and all of the dads there. I want to once again applaud everybody for the commitment you've made to taking the most important task you have in your life to the highest level you can. And recently, I've been doing research for the second volume in a new book series I'm doing called Words That Shaped Our World, and researching some of the greatest quotes of all times from rich and famous and notable people throughout history. And in doing the research for the new book, I was studying a gentleman who has been ranked among the top 5 entertainers of the 20th century. You would all know his name if I said it. And as part of my research, I interviewed his daughter. He has passed away. And in interviewing his daughter, after I got all the facts and figures and the historical things about this gentleman, I said, was he a good dad? And she said, he was a great entertainer. He may have been a good man, but he was not a good dad. And I realized that at a level that really matters, he had failed to reach the goal that we all should seek to attain in this life. Because I don't care what else you do, where else you go, what you earn, anything you have, if you fail at the task of being a dad, you have not succeeded. And each and every time I stand up in front of a group of people somewhere in the world, in an arena or convention center, or now, thanks to conditions over the last few years, do one of these podcasts. Every time I do this, I am always reminded of that time in my life when this was not possible. It was 35 years ago. That morning I woke up, I instantly realized I'd lost the remainder of my sight, and I began learning how to live my life as a blind person. And the thoughts and the doubts and the fears that came over me that morning, those 35 years ago, would be impossible to describe to you. I was 29 years old. I had never met a blind person, and I didn't have a clue what I was going to do with the rest of my life. In fact, the only plan I could come up with that morning involved moving into this little 9 by 12 foot room in the back of my house where I had my radio and my telephone and my tape recorder. And that was my whole world. I thought I'd never leave that room again. The thought of traveling millions of miles and speaking to millions of people, or running a television network with over 1,000 stations, or writing 50 books and having 9 of them now turned into movies, or the thought of sitting here today in my dining room and talking to you guys would have seemed as foreign to me as going to the moon. So I sat in my little 9 by 12 foot self-imposed prison there day after day after day, getting more and more depressed and more discouraged. And I'm quite certain I would still be there this morning, except for one thing. And that is the fact that I literally ached for people like you to come and talk to. So I want you to know what a thrill it is for me to be here and to be asked back. Hey, it's one thing if you're a speaker and somebody asks you once, but it's really the prize when they ask you back. And so I appreciate the invitation, and I don't know how many of these we've done, but I always welcome the opportunity to speak to people that are striving to do better at the most important role you'll ever have. Now, as a blind person, I go through my life and I make things happen due to the efforts of some very special people. I have colleagues and friends who dedicate their lives, and in my case, they dedicate their eyes to making it possible for me to do what I do. And today, being that it is Saturday morning and I'm at home, my bride, Crystal, is actually here, and today is her birthday. And So I am very grateful she's here to help me do this, because this technology would not be functioning for me if she weren't here. And when COVID hit and I started doing a lot of these kind of sessions, I started calling her my producer, like a movie producer, when we have one of my books that are turned into a film. And I introduced Crystal as the producer. Well, she let me know recently she's now the executive producer. I wasn't quite sure the difference, and when I asked, it has a lot to do with compensation. So this is not a cheap, inexpensive morning for me here. I want you to know that, but well worth it. And I want to dedicate the next few moments of our time together here to my father. He'll be 92 this year. We speak every morning, including this morning. And, you know, when I reflect back on him and the way I grew up, I've gotten far more wealth and acclaim and fortune and notoriety for making books and movies and speeches and columns that are simply describing the way I was raised. If everybody had been raised by my parents, I'd have to find another way to make a living, because you know, the wisdom that people are helped by simply came to me through that process. And you need to know about my parents. I'm their third child, and the first two died. I had a brother died of cystic fibrosis and a sister that died of leukemia. And if you've seen the movie based on my book, The Ultimate Gift, the character James Garner and Abigail Breslin, the character that Abby played, the little girl dying of leukemia, that was not fiction like many people think it was. That was based on my sister. So my parents' first two children died, and then I came along. And I was, in my teenage year, as David said, I was diagnosed with a condition that would cause me to lose my sight. And, you know, I so admire the way my dad handled this when I look back on that. And there's two things I want to focus on this morning that he did very, very well that can serve all of us today and going forward. One is he set an example, and the second is he set an expectation. Example was about him, expectations about me. Example is about you, expectation is about your kids. And my dad set an example. And it wasn't the great, grand, and wonderful thing. We live in a world of superheroes and all these things and Marvel comics and all the things that happen. And, you know, we see the headlines and everything. And I do 2 national radio shows a week. And I always come on the air as they come out of the news and they say, well, that's what's going on in the world today. No, the headlines are not what's going on in the world today. The headlines are the fine print that somebody took up and they blew it up into the headline, and they make it look like that's what's going on in the world today. What's going on in the world every day is great people got up, they loved their kids, they got them off to school, they went and did their job, they did their best to make a difference and create value in the world. They came home and tried to create an environment that would make their kids' life better than theirs was. And that's the headline. That's what's going on in the world today. The things we hear on the news, those are the exceptions, the weird things that we deem to be newsworthy, but that's not what's going on. And we need to always remember that. So when we're setting an example, when I think of my father, it's not any great, grand, leaping tall buildings in a single bound or anything like that. It's every day in every way, going and doing the little things right, time after time after time. I did a lot of work with the late, great General Colin Powell. And I'll never forget one of the sayings he repeated quite often was, a leader is a leader all the time. Leaders don't get a day off. If you're a general all the time. And as my friend and mentor, Coach John Wooden, often told his players, you'll be known for a lifetime of great things you do, or one lapse in judgment. You'll be known for one of those two things in your life. And, you know, so when I think of all those things my dad did, I realized dads are the same way. Dads don't get a day off. You tell your kids things you want them to remember, clean up your room, study hard, do all that. You hope they remember those. You say something you wish you hadn't said, or do something you shouldn't have done, they'll remember that forever. They can quote that back to you. And you got to remember, a dad is a dad all the time. So remember, when you're going through your day, you're not just performing tasks and doing your routine, you're setting an example. And the next thing my dad did was he set an expectation. And for me as a blind person and anybody dealing with the challenge, the problem I deal with is not that I can't see. I can accommodate for that. I have people and tricks and things I can do to get around all that. I can function. But the most debilitating thing for me about being blind is the fact that no one has any expectations for me. If I just stayed in that little 9 by 12-foot room and just played my radio, people would say, hey, isn't it great he can play the radio right there? And that's all that I would need to do in my life. And so you have to be internally motivated, and then you have to surround yourself with a group of people who will love you enough to hold you to the highest standards. And that's what my father did and still does for me. We talk every morning. We get together once a week for dinner, but every morning, as a part of my routine, I have a conversation with my father. And to this day, as he approaches his 92nd birthday, he is still holding me accountable and setting an expectation. He reads my books, watches the movies, he's aware of the things I do. And, you know, he's very complimentary. He'll say, this may be one of the best books you've written. And just as I'm soaking in that, you know, praise and accolade from the guy that matters most in my life, he said, you know, this may be one of the best books you ever wrote. Pause. But it won't be the best book you ever write. So while on one hand, he's patting you on the back, with the other hand, he's patting you a little lower and a little harder to let you know you haven't arrived yet. You're doing good, but you haven't arrived yet. I remember as a young man, my only ambition growing up here in Oklahoma was to be an All-American football player and then to go into the NFL and make my living playing football on Sundays. And the scouts and the coaches and everybody involved with that process assured me I had the size and speed to do that. So it was just a matter of time in my life till I'm playing football on Sundays and making my living doing that. And every year before you go play big time football, you have to go get a physical. They want to make sure you're really healthy before they take you out and try to kill you. That's what they do. And they poke you, they prod you, they weigh you, they measure you, they do all this stuff. And I remember one year it was taking a lot longer than the physical usually takes. And this doctor came in and he shined a light in my eyes and wrote something down. And another doctor came in and he shined his light in my eyes. And eventually a third guy came in. He did several other tests. And eventually these 3 doctors took me down a hall and sat me down at a table. And they said, Jim, we're not sure why and we're not sure when, but we do know someday you're going to be totally blind and there's nothing we can do about it. And your whole world just stops right there. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew the one thing I had in my life, the light at the end of my tunnel was gone. I did a little research there. It may interest you. At that time and to this very day, there's never been a blind guy in the NFL. Now, if you watch some of the preseason games, you might question that, but I've been assured that those guys have sight and they have some other issues. But I didn't know what I was going to do. My parents took me everywhere. And I almost felt sorry for them because with my brother and then with my sister with leukemia, they've been all over the country trying to do that. And now they're taking me all over the country. And we ended up at Florida State at the great eye clinic with one of the world-renowned ophthalmologists. And he looked at me and finally he told me, he said, there's nothing we can do. And you've just got to get used to the fact you're not going to have a normal life. Well, I was devastated. I was literally in tears. I'm this giant guy, still a kid in a lot of ways, but a grown man in a body. And I went out to see my parents in the waiting room and I'm literally in tears. And my dad hugged me and I said, Dad, he says, I'm not going to be normal. And Dad said, well, son, I never figured being normal was anything worth aspiring to. Let's go back to Oklahoma. And from that day to this, he continued to set an expectation that I would do great things. And even when I accomplish a great thing, that's a plateau to stand on so you can see greater things in the future. So I know it's tough when you're dealing with kids, especially when they have challenges and problems and things they're dealing with, and it's hard to push them, but love those kids enough to expect the very best and then a little more. And if you can do that, you'll be a great dad. And if you're a great dad, I don't care what else you do in your life, man, you made it. You made it. So I want to once again thank David for inviting me to be with you guys. I want to thank you for the commitment you're making to improve in the most important role you have in your life. And as always, I'll leave you and your kids with this. Hold on to your dreams and stand tall, even when those around you would force you to crawl. Hold on to your dreams as a race you must run, even when reality whispers you'll never be done. And finally, dads listening to me right now, hold on to your dreams and wait for the miracle to come. Because on that miraculous day, your dreams and your reality will merge into one. I love you guys. Look forward to seeing you next time. David, I'll turn it back over to you.
Jim, just an amazing presentation. Every time I hear you speak, I'm inspired. I read that first book of yours, You Don't Have to Be Blind to See, 30 or so years ago. And ever since, I've been a follower of yours. And it was like a dream come true to meet you. And if you remember, the 4 years ago or 5 years ago, I reached out to you with this notion of interviewing your dad, right?
Yeah.
And you'd said, yeah, I'll talk to my dad and, see if that makes sense or see if we can make that happen. And he was then maybe only 88.
Yeah.
You had told me, my dad's flattered. He'd be very interested in talking with you, but I don't think the podcast format would be the best format. And I was like despondent. I'm like, oh my God, one of my heroes' dads. I'm this close, but maybe, just a day, a week, a month, a year short of having that opportunity. So a number of months goes by, and I got back to you and said, well, maybe you could speak for your dad, or you could tell your story. And I'm so grateful that you've been involved with the Special Fathers Network like you have year after year, and for sharing your story on the podcast and being with us today. And the last thing I'd like to say is happy birthday to the executive producer.
Well, we thank you for that. My dad sends his regards. He loves what you do, but he's a part of that greatest generation, and they did everything in the world, and they gave us the world we live in, but they don't blow their own horn. I mean, if you've ever talked to any of those World War II veterans, these are heroic guys. But if you ask them, oh no, I just did my job. The other guys did all that stuff. And my dad is one of those guys. So he would just say, well, I was just a dad and I just did that. But boy, that means a lot. And so on behalf of my dad and me and the happy birthday executive producer over there, we thank you guys and have an amazing day.
Thanks again, Jim. Be well.